Good evening. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Same to you. Gosh, 2-week break. We're rusty.
I'd like to call the January 9th Select Board meeting to order. I don't believe that there are any changes to the agenda. The only announcement is that the meeting's being video and audio recorded. Are there any public comments tonight for something that's otherwise not on our agenda for discussion? Cormac?
Thank you. Cormac Collier, Nantucket Land Council. I'm just going to make a statement because I don't want it discussed, obviously, during public comment. I believe Libby had distributed an email that I had written in regards to fertilizer regulations. Did you? Yeah. I would request that this gets put on an agenda in approximately 2 weeks. I think you certainly saw my my frustration in the email. I have not heard back from any of the staff that I wrote to, so I think that should also be noted as well. And I think there's a clear, easy way to go forward in terms of next steps by really just getting the committee back together, but even more so getting a clear, cohesive, strategic action plan by staff to be presented to the Board of Selectmen and Libby. And that really will help fulfill one of your goals for water quality. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment tonight?
Yes,
For not something that's not on the agenda?
okay, so I'm just not sure I'm doing this at the right time, but I wanted to know if this is the appropriate time to talk about the short-term rental tax.
We're going to talk about that in regard to the warrant articles.
Okay,
So
on the
we're
agenda.
getting to that.
Thank you.
It wasn't real clear.
No, I know.
And unfortunately, so a lot of
Next
people
week,
didn't.
it will be more clarified in
Okay,
the way it's
good.
worded.
Okay.
I don't believe there's any new business tonight. Approval of minutes, warrants, and pending contracts.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
All those, and warrants and treasury, payroll warrants and treasury warrants?
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yeah.
Any questions on the contracts?
No. Move approval of the contracts.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. We have a gift acceptance for Human Services in Our Island Home.
Move approval with send it letters like we do.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We have a resignation from Roads and Right-of-Ways.
John, could you speak into the mic because
We have a resignation from Roads and Right-of-Ways. Is that better?
I would move to accept that. And I thought the explanation was very helpful.
And send a letter.
And send a letter of thank you, of thanks.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And we do have a public hearing this evening on the general fund budget. The budget was presented in December. And this is the public's chance to comment. I will open the public hearing. Seeing no comments. Oh,
Thank you. Tobias Glidden, 24 Rugged Road. I just wanted to commend the board for including their strategic plan as part of the budget. I also wanted to mention in the sustainability portion of your budget, I presented 3 articles at town meeting related to green communities. It is a very good effort that's been proposed by and adopted by 240 other communities across Massachusetts. It provides hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants for communities to reduce their energy usage. And it would be, there's a $100,000 request for funding for that program to get it underway, to do an island-wide energy study, and it would be very valuable if that was included in some capacity in the town's budget. Thank you. For the following year, if it doesn't get approved at town meeting.
Okay. Are there any other public comments? Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing.
Madam Chairman, I just want to mention that this is an annual public hearing that we've been having for several years now for public comment, so we appreciate the one that was made. In the meantime, the board should determine whether to endorse what was presented to them and forward it on to the Finance Committee, or are there any changes that the board wants to see? As Mr. Glidden may have noted, none of the citizen warrant article items are contained in the budget currently. That may or may not change as we progress through the budget process. And we had somewhat, I guess, recommended, or not somewhat, we are recommending an override for our island home. And if not at this town meeting, it needs to be seriously considered going forward. Now that the short-term rental tax may play into things revenue-wise, it may be also something to look at. But Brian, did you want to add? We talked earlier today about the override issue with our island home. We did go to the school committee last night, and I'm advised that there was a bit of discussion that they had about the budget and how their requests were being handled. And I'm told that in the end, they still have a public hearing to go through themselves, but it sounded as though they were likely to I guess, I don't want to put words in their mouth, to endorse what was presented to them. Correct?
So thank you. So with respect to the recommendation on the override, I know that we have been kind of advancing this proposal for a number of years, the last few years, with relation to our island home. We don't necessarily have to do it immediately for the April town meeting, but if at the April town meeting we have a transfer from the reserve, the amount that we're holding back for free cash to close any deficits in this year, then we are going to have to consider doing something at a special town meeting. We still could do an override at the special town meeting to fix the problem then as well. I think the thought process was that it would be better for us to go into the July 1st, starting with the budget, if the override were to be successful for Island Home, to start with that certainty of knowing that we wouldn't be faced potentially with having to try to do this in September and October. If there was a need to have to do something at that point, we wouldn't be able to set the tax rate until that issue was solved. So I don't know I know that there's been some questions about what we would do with the money. I don't know that we really are looking to spend it, but as I told you in the presentation in December 19th, we are basically and essentially for the first time since I've been here exactly at the levy limit. We have $2,000 under the levy limit, which is really not a lot of money. So we do have options, but it is something that we're going to have to address at some point, sooner rather than later.
My concern, I'll just reiterate what I said then. I think what we need to figure out with the island home is how can we operate it properly. Building it is the easy part. Managing it and running it and housing those employees is very difficult. And so until I see, how we're going to do that, and we've got studies going on and things happening, I have a hard time supporting it, because that just means that I get worried that we'll be inertia and we won't, make the hard decisions and do some of the things we need to do. And so, so anyway, I've consistently said that, and I will,
Matt, just to sorry, Jim.
Go ahead.
Just to clarify, you're opposed to having it as an override. Those are your
at
concerns.
this point,
if it was an
I want to
override.
see, I'd like to know how are we going to staff it? How are we going to run it? How are we going to negotiate the changes if we're going to change the type of facility we have? How are we going to negotiate the changes necessary to man and staff it? I don't want to do an override and then 2 years, 3 years from now be a runaway train. I just think that I have some serious concerns about how we're handling that, and so I'm this is my only leverage to say, hey, show me how we're going to do it, and I've consistently asked for that.
And I guess I have a kind of a fundamental management disagreement with operating overrides. This board appointed me to the finance committee of the town in 2007. We were just entering some pretty bleak financial times. And in 2007, an operating override for the general fund was proposed. And, the finance committee worked with the finance department and town administration. We found, I think the time was $300,000. I don't remember the amount. Seems like a small number now. Because I think we should live within our means and make the necessary adjustments as we go along. Specifically to the island home, when we have an operating override, it really, and we've discussed this, it takes the conversation off the table, I believe. So I'm not in favor of operating overrides in general for the reasons I just outlined, and our island home in particular. I am a little concerned that as we've got a report recently on the planning that Matt referenced, we had originally charged the group to look at rebuilding or renovating or rebuilding the existing nursing home, and I guess I'm a little concerned that now the scope may include something to do with the landmark house, and I think that just creates more capital expenditures. With more capital expenditures come more operating expenditures, more staff, more people. So for those reasons, as I said, I would not be. And to correct me if I'm wrong, the budget. If we adopted the budget tonight, that does not include the operating override because the budget you submitted is a balanced budget without it.
That is correct. It
Okay.
does not include the override.
Okay.
The
Thank you.
override would be a separate article.
Thank you.
But it has very little leeway and makes projections on revenues coming in to balance it.
I mean, I certainly am very cognizant, and believe me, when I approached the town manager for probably the third year in a row with this discussion, it wasn't, running and skipping into our office. It was with severe trepidation about doing this because I certainly understand everyone's concern with this. The reality is that we are faced with an entity that is, the dynamics are changing in the census and the amount of revenue we're bringing in, and we do provide a subsidy of over $2 million this year. And if the revenue does not come in the way we think it's going to the rest of the year, that means that we will have to change revenue projections into next year. And while there may be some ability to make changes in the expenditures there, a lot of those things are required to provide. So we are faced with a very difficult choice in the short term, not in the long term. It's not something we can continuously not discuss and address. We do at some point have to fund it in a way that makes sense for it, because if you look at the budget that we've proposed, which I think is going to be before you next week, it will essentially eliminate all of their retained earnings, is how we're funding this. So that to me is a very unstable and unpredictable way to fund something that I think is very important to everybody on the island. So that's the real reason behind proposing this once again as well, is that we need to, as we continue down this road, we need to fund it in a stable manner.
I actually support the override. I think that it puts actually the conversation on the table for the community to affirm its commitment to keeping the island home as an important service to Nantucket. Because it's a subsidized entity. It's not ever going to pay for itself. So I think I might be alone on that.
No, I would agree with. I understand I understand Matt and Jim. I understand your position and it being in principle, the idea of an operating override. I will say though that Brian has worked very hard to get us to where we are, the financial stability that we have right now, and so to have him say that he's concerned about where we stand with it coming out of the general fund. I think it's definitely two things. One, I definitely take heed to that, and it would make me nervous to be cutting it that close. But as well, I think that having it in the general fund, we haven't really had it be a part of the conversation at the forefront. So maybe it is time to have it as an override. I'm not sure, but I think it does need to be a more current conversation. And if an override achieves that, then I'd be willing to support that.
I guess one other point is, as we talked about, Dawn, you mentioned the fact that this will always run at a subsidy. We had a very robust, vigorous business plan developed for the island home, the brand new island home, the small house model, the most up-to-date, state-of-the-art way to deliver nursing home care on the side of Sherburne Commons, and that was a break even. That was in the business plan. It was well challenged by everyone involved, and so it can be done, and it can be done in the high and with the highest and best care for the residents of the island home. So, but certainly not in the institutional model that we're doing now. We will not. You will continue to subsidize it to provide care in a setting, in a method that is not delivered. We would be unable to get approval for an institutional-based model nursing home today by the Department of Public Health. They really are focused on the small house model, which maybe you're looking at that. I hope you are, but that was the model that we had planned, and the town meeting, obviously overturned.
But that's in the absence of that. This is overrides being requested to keep it running in its current form. So.
Well, I mean, I support our island home, but and I support the work Brian's doing. What I don't support is there are hard decisions and tough things that have to happen for us. If we're supporting it $2 million a year, going up 2.5%, yeehaw, I'm all on board. If it's $2 million a year going up 8 or 10 or 20%, I'm not on board. Because we're not willing to make the hard decisions and negotiate the way we need to negotiate to get to the house model and get housing so we can staff it. What good does it do if we rebuild that building or we move it and build it somewhere else and there's nobody to hire? And we're giving terrible service. There's more to this than just the money and and solving a budget problem now. There's a management issue. There's a staffing and management and operating issue that I'm afraid if we do this, that we'll be able to stick our head in the sand over again, and then we'll find ourselves back in the same situation. So I just anyway, and I think and putting it in the putting it as an operating override and then sticking it in the budget is different than having it as outside of the budget every year. Right now, we look at it. You put it in there, it actually loses transparency. So anyway,
obviously a topic we're all passionate about.
Yeah, and I'm a numbers guy. I'm a numbers and a process and show me the money. Show me how it's going to work.
Well, the $2 million shortfall equates to $57,000 a year per resident. So that's the subsidy. That's and I just think about the amount of home care that could be delivered in a person's home for $57,000 a year. But.
Libby, do you have an update on the timeline for when we're hearing back from the consultants?
Well, we have two consultants that we're working with. One is working on the financials, and there have been a number of financials provided in the past, as Mr. Kelly noted. And the other is an architect to look at what it would take to construct a new facility at the current site or renovate a facility at the current site, as the board requested about 1.5 years ago. And that has taken a little bit longer than we thought, although my understanding is that right around the holidays, the proposals came in and we're about to pick
There are 3 proposals that just got distributed.
Okay. So soon we'll pick one and they will undertake that analysis. And the issue with Landmark House is, I think, to simply assess, again, what it is going to take to construct on the current site. The Landmark House isn't really the current site, but it has been suggested that if it were to be moved, there could potentially be additional land there, although obviously it's extraordinarily costly, and I would imagine it's going to end up being an option that's not financially viable.
But it was suggested that it might be worthwhile to explore the idea of an overall campus
And I guess to me that just back to my point about this, we try to discipline ourselves on developing charges for these work groups, and my impression is that's outside the scope. So that might be something that the board may want to give feedback to the work group about that. But that's just my own personal view.
My feeling, as I was a part of the work group, Dawn and myself have made it. We haven't actually made it to the same meeting, or a few of the same meetings, but I do think that it was a part of the scope, and what the aim was to at least consider all the possibilities we have in a very difficult site, and understanding that there are going to be many limitations, whether it has to do with flooding regulations, whether it has to upgrading space. I don't think it was outside of the scope to take into consideration every single available possibility. So I don't think the group dwelled on anything that seemed totally infeasible, but I think the hope was that by looking outside the box that we might come back to something that would work. So, and I also think that the consultants at some point were discussing the staffing and the more administrative side and financial side that Matt is talking about as well, correct?
Yeah, there are a lot of operational issues. They're not going to save us money. That's for sure. And when we're talking about housing for employees, I think we are talking overall in other discussions about housing in general for town employees. But the issue of the negotiating is a completely different matter that I don't know that we're ever going to be able to completely resolve. If the negotiation is meant to be along the lines of, if we provide housing for people, they get paid less. That is going to be a very difficult discussion.
And I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about we'd have to negotiate to change from the model now to the other model, and so that the pushback will be, well, we need everything. We don't want that model. We want what we have plus more. So we right now is when we have right now. We have leverage right now to say this is what we need to do for the good of the entire community. This is what's fair for the employees, for the residents, for everyone on the island. This will enable us to put something in place that will last for 50 or 100 years. But if we don't do that now, looking at it from all angles, I'm afraid that we won't get the opportunity to do that. So,
well, we're required to bargain it no matter what.
I understand.
So, I mean, there would be certainly a strategy discussion in executive session, I would imagine, about this, but I don't know how that will end up. It's not going to be ignored.
And regardless, we need to keep the place running properly for the next few years. We're not taking anything to town meeting this year. We're at least a year away from any kind of a proposal to town meeting, if we can have it done by then, because all of these options are going to have to be analyzed. So I would like to see if the community would reaffirm that the Island Home is a very important service, which I think it is, but I want to.
And this would be a do we like our beaches vote.
Right.
Of course, we like the Island Home. Of course, we like old people. But it's going to be an easy vote. We're all going to.
But we are talking about actual
I'm old now. I'm
money
getting there now.
involved, not just we like something.
No, but unfortunately, when you go to town meeting, that's what you get. That's what we'll be voting on, is whether we want to support guys like me as we age. I mean and so I just think that's so that's sort of our job isn't to do that. I don't think our job is to find the solutions and to help help get us to the right thing. We don't have to belabor this. I have talked about this consistently and asked consistently. You don't have to belabor it, but I think,
So do we want to accept the budget as is?
I make a motion that we adopt the budget as presented.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Sorry, I was going to say aye.
What?
I was going to say aye.
Okay. I'm opposed because I think we should do the override.
So do we bring it up next week? And when Jason's here, it's 2-2, right?
No, it's
I
3 to
said
2.
aye.
Oh, 3-2.
3 to 2.
Okay.
3 to 1.
3 to 1.
3 to 1.
Okay.
But I do think that regardless of where it exists, I think having this conversation now means we haven't discussed it enough. And it's something that we need to bring up in anticipation of this coming up again, either at a special town meeting or next town meeting. We need to discuss this before then.
And I'm concerned that the shortfall is going to necessitate a special town meeting.
And I think it'd be great if, when you get your recommendations of the whoever, if you bring those 3 recommendations for a conversation to this board, I'd be very interested in not to take the place of the work group in terms of your choice, but just to give
Oh, I think that
give
that's the idea,
to bring all 3 to us.
to bring whatever comes out of it to the
No,
board.
no, the
right?
3. You're saying you get 3 proposals. I'd very much like to see those.
Oh.
And bring that as an agenda
Proposals
item to
for
this
the-
board.
From the RFP?
Well, eventually there would be a pending contract.
No, I understand. But you said you got 3 proposals around the holidays. I think it'd be interesting to see those.
We can forward them to you.
Great. And have a discussion at a board meeting about it.
Okay, what would the discussion be meant to accomplish?
To just do exactly what Rita said. Have a conversation. That we haven't been talking about this matter enough at this board meeting.
So the proposals for the architecture firm?
Yeah.
Well, that's not normally how an RFP gets awarded.
Can you have discussion though at the board level outside of the RFP process?
It wasn't an RFP. I mean,
Or
the services that were,
whatever
because it's
it was.
design and that was exempt, so we didn't do an RFP. So
So
we
it's-
could,
discussion is open.
yeah. I don't see a reason why it wouldn't be.
Okay.
I would support Jim in saying being on the work group, but I think conversations like this is an opportunity to pull out some of these things that we're talking about now in looking at the proposals without necessarily putting ourselves in place of the work group. So I would be in support of that.
Okay.
And just before we go off this, just a question. What happens in the case of, like Toby and the green communities, if that's voted at town meeting? Then do we have to then find the funding, or what's the?
Well, someone will have to identify a funding source. And I don't really know at this point what that would be. I guess we would have to discuss that.
Right.
We're very tight on this budget.
I know,
so-
I understand. That's why I'm asking, because
Yeah.
I know how important what he's talking about is, and I know how it aligns with our goals. But I also know that we're tight on the budget. And if we were doing something and knew that it was going to give the money to pay for itself in the first year, or if someone was paying for part of it and it was going to lead to money down the in later years, I'm kind of giving Toby a hint that maybe then it would be a little more palatable.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I would imagine free cash, I hate to even say that, but I would imagine free cash is the source which we are trying to hold as best we can for the unexpected.
And we are way better situation now than we were going into the last downturn with money put into into funds. What do you call it? That begins with an S.
Stabilization.
Stabilization. There we go. The stabilization fund and the capital fund. We're in a lot better shape than we were then.
True.
And that's because we've been trying to be more fiscally aware. So that's.
Okay. Town manager's report.
So we have our continued discussion about the preliminary draft 2019 annual town meeting and election warrant. And what is in your packet is a draft, it's very rough, but a draft warrant that we're starting to get compiled, and an outline of what is outstanding. So the,
Is the highlighted the changes since the last time we discussed this?
Actually, in the draft warrant itself, you mean?
Yep.
That is,
What we got this afternoon. That came this afternoon as a late addition to the packet.
I'm not sure what came to you this afternoon. Do you know?
Okay. No,
There's yellow highlights on the warrant.
This came with the warrant and the short-term rental all came today.
The warrant don't pay attention to the warrant highlights. Some of it
Okay,
means it's
so that's
new.
what-
Some of it
I wish we'd
means.
known that voice, but
Well,
we're
what I
still
wanted
over it.
you to, I probably should have made this more clear, but what I wanted you to pay more attention to is the outline, the one-page
Okay.
cover sheet. And what I had said on that was that the highlighted items are in process or need review. So outstanding items for the board's determination, which we've been talking a bit about, and you don't necessarily have to firm these up tonight, but to remind you that right now you're scheduled to adopt this warrant on January 23rd. So outstanding, we've still got the milestone and or
so
Old
could
South.
you just, where is your summary on the
It's the
agenda?
page before that.
67, I think.
Yep.
It's on the one that came today.
Or 62
So-
of the old packet.
On the milestone in Old South Road, I think at a minimum, we should be putting in the main rotaries reconstruction, which I've said before.
I just need to know what you want to put in.
I agree with Don. At least put that in and give it a try. But
That's the most I'd be willing to put in at this stage.
So the main rotaries, so that would not include all of the work on Old South Road. So that would include the main rotary, the Fairgrounds Rotary.
No, I'm just
No.
talking about the reconstruction of the existing rotary. I mean, I would like to see more happen, but we have not been very successful with getting that out there.
And are we still planning to do some sort of mock-up of a rotary at Fairgrounds that Rob had mentioned?
that's coming up for discussion.
Sorry, I was talking with the chief. I didn't catch those last few
The
comments.
mock-up,
I was just wondering, you had mentioned,
Fairgrounds?
a mock-up rotary at
Yes.
Fairgrounds.
So we have taken steps. I got some feedback early from our consultant. We're back to the drawing table. So it's not as simple as we thought it might be, of course. Hopefully. We do have a public information session set up to discuss that specifically. Bear with me a sec. I'll get the date for you.
So is it ready to come before
Not even close.
the town meeting?
The pilot? Or are you talking about the project
the
itself?
project
No,
for Fairgrounds.
I don't believe the project is. No.
Okay, so town administration's not recommending that it come forward?
The Fairgrounds roundabout.
Yep.
We didn't really make a recommendation on this because I wasn't really asked to do that. But,
Okay. I'd be interested in hearing your recommendation.
February 14th, we have a scheduled meeting to present the findings of the ongoing discussions with the engineers with regard, specifically if we could get a pilot in place for the 2 weeks prior to Daffodil Weekend. The hope was to, if we were able to put something in place to pilot that location, to put it in place at that time, specifically to get a little bit of higher volume of traffic. It's sort of the first of the year, and then take it down, give the locals an understanding of how it might function, and to test it through that busier peak.
well, has anything changed with we've had a recommendation repeatedly from administration and planning that all of the road improvements are important. So
Right.
that hasn't changed.
That has
But
not
it's
changed.
a matter of what we bring forward for this town meeting.
Sure.
And I guess it depends on, I go back and forth on, should we propose things that we think might get passed? Or should we say, we continue to believe this is important and we want all these projects approved? And I'm really kind of on that latter side. Because I can't personally say one's more important than the other. And now that's why I asked if there's a recommendation. If I was gonna back down, from everything to something else, I'd want to have somebody else besides me make that decision, personally. Because I think it's important.
Well, I just continue to think that there have been concerns with all of the new pieces and rebuilding the current infrastructure in the proper way. If we could at least pull that out and have it be a standalone article, even if we put everything back in, then at least that one might go through and get done in the next year.
And I believe there's a fair amount of state money lined up for that. Is Mike here to?
But
That one we're counting on a fair amount of state money for that, correct? Yeah, so that will be reimbursed. So of all of them, that is the one that we should.
we just have to do it.
Yeah, which is why I support doing that. I'm not sure I support all the others because I'm not even sure that it'll be a solution. I think it's traditional traffic stuff that probably won't work because it doesn't work anywhere else. So, in this situation, so I think that we ought to, be thinking differently than that. But, on that rotary alone, sure. But I'd like to know the downstream impacts, which I always talk about, and we haven't quite done that yet.
So that goes back to originally, I was very much in favor of doing all of them. I know Matt was not. And so maybe that's the conversation we need to have here and less about what we think might get passed. I like the idea of putting them in separate articles, and that's a way for people to make a judgment one way or the next. But my view hasn't changed on how important they are. So.
Should we take this up again next week when we're a full board?
Yes.
I think we should,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Good idea. I'll tell my gondola story next week.
Great.
Okay, the next item that we brought up for the board's consideration, although it was more for discussion purposes, was the wastewater infrastructure improvement fund. This is a CPA-like across the board, I hate to even say this word, tax of 3% that would go specifically towards funding wastewater and water quality projects. And potentially, I guess in light of the short-term rental bill, this may be a discussion we'd want to have at a different time, possibly.
Or it could be an alternative.
Or it could be an alternative. It's a different type of tax. It's all property owners, not certain.
It's been a while since we discussed it. Could we get a summary of what that is?
It's, as they're coming up, it's a 3% tax, up to 3% tax. Doesn't have to be 3, it could be up to 3. That works just like the Community Preservation Act tax, and the revenue goes specifically towards wastewater projects and water quality projects. It requires a town meeting vote and a ballot vote.
And these are for capital projects that would have otherwise been, we assume, debt service overrides?
Would have been through some type of borrowing,
Borrowing.
Yes, depending on where the project was going to be paid for. Well, most likely out of the general fund, so yes, it could have been an override. At 3%, it would raise, excuse me, approximately $2.2 million in fiscal 20.
And from a financing standpoint, which makes more sense? Creating this sinking fund or borrowing? I don't know, it was Cinda is
Well,
she weighed in on it at all? Or?
We could, I still have to investigate all of the mechanics of this, but I would believe, similar to what we can do with the CPC money in terms of their borrowing authority, we more than likely could take this and turn it into a large-scale borrowing with this to calculate what this number would be in interest and principal, and then back into what we could use for a large-scale borrowing to fund projects versus just spending $2.2 million every year. So it's a possibility or something, but I think in light of with the short-term rental tax, which we'll be talking about in a little while, I think that it was a decision that this might be something that we want to talk about at a later date rather than for this warrant. But
Okay, so you want to take it off the
I think that's
warrant.
the recommendation of the town manager, yes.
Okay.
I just have a question about the wording and understanding. I think this might be for you, John. It said that if a municipality decides to withdraw from the fund and then they, at a later date, vote to be a part of it again, that they can't withdraw from the fund for 2 years. And it also said for Nantucket, we could refrain from, I think, getting the DEP decision on whether or not
Right.
our wastewater management is that the same as
That's not the
withdrawing?
WEF.
No, so
different fund.
we're
Oh,
talking
that's the
about the
short term.
wastewater infrastructure investment fund.
Okay, so I'm on a different
But
one
you're
already.
talking about the short-term rental provisions.
Okay.
So, and I would just clarify that the WIF that we've been calling it can be spent for water, wastewater, or stormwater infrastructure projects. So it's for capital expenses associated with those three items.
Thank you.
Well, if we're going to wait on the WIF, you might as well stay up there because we're going into short-term rental bill.
Okay, sure.
So this is where this was on the agenda. I know it wasn't clear, but it's on this list.
Before we go off the whiff, I can't help myself. Are there any advantages of adopting that? Earlier, are there matching funds? Are we looked at differently by the state or anything? Like when we went into the CPC early, we got a lot more free money, kind of in matching money, which was the goal.
Right.
And
The answer is no.
There isn't.
There's no state matching funds with the WIF.
Okay.
And if you were to do it at this annual town meeting, as Libby indicated, it's a two-step process. So you would have to wait until the 2020 annual election, and if it passed there, then you could start collecting the tax in 2020, fiscal year 2021. So, but there's no state matching funds. But also, it's a purely a mechanism, as Brian said, of financing. Yeah. So you would still be eligible. I don't think it would affect your eligibility, for example, for SRF funding and other grants.
That was my question. So it will not.
No.
Okay.
Carl, do you have a question about the WIF?
Yes. It was Carl Linval, 5 Boulevard. I was wondering how the projection of 2.2 million in revenue was derived. As far as I know, there's no tracking basis of how many leases are.
This isn't
sorry.
applicable to leases.
It's not.
Totally different.
It's totally different
This is a tax on all property owners.
on all property owners. In addition,
This has
Okay.
nothing to do with the
This has
short-term
nothing to
rental
do with the
tax.
short-term rental bill. This is a completely different fund.
okay. So I
We
was
probably
Sorry.
should stop
I'm
talking
sorry.
about this.
You, as were some of us. So-
I think that's why the
confused.
recommendation
You're with
is
a
to
bunch of
take
us.
this up later.
And so I'm guessing the 2.2 million was derived based on calculations of property value.
It's based on the same formula used to derive in which was the number given to the CPC for this year's funding source. So yes.
Thank you.
So put off or just
Yes.
get more information?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's really clear that there will be a lot of confusion if we start talking about that tax at the same time as the short-term rental tax options at town meeting. So now for the
Okay.
main event, the short-term rental tax.
Great. So the short-term rental tax law was passed on December 28th, and so there's been a tremendous amount of questions that have arisen. I know a lot of homeowners are wondering, are they subject to the tax if they rent their homes, and exactly how the whole process will work. And we're still waiting for some general guidance from the Department of Revenue. But in the interim, I thought it was important to present the board with a memo that really is focused on potential town meeting votes you might want to consider or not. And so that's really the focus of my memo. So if I could just go through this, and if anybody has a question, I'm happy to stop and answer it as we go along. But
This memo is in the packet, so it's a public document. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah, it's in the packet. So
Yes.
I don't know if you want to, for those of you in the audience who want to see as we're going through it, if you have access to the packet, you can
and it's
call
up
it
on
up.
it's up on the screen as well. Okay. So what the law did was essentially add short-term rentals to the types of establishments that are subject to the local option rooms occupancy tax. And as you all know, maybe effective in 2010, Nantucket adopted the prior version of this law and has been receiving a 6% surcharge on basically bed and breakfast establishments, hotels, motels, and hotels and motels. What this does, it adds short-term rentals to the establishments that will be subject to the tax. Now, the tax
Could I ask a question about that? You said that in 2010, this board adopted
Town meeting
adopted this law,
the prior version of this.
the prior version of this law.
But
So that's different from, because I've heard that we've already adopted this, but this is a separate piece of legislation.
It amends the law that you adopted in 2010.
can I just add a tiny bit to that? In 2009, special town meeting went into effect in 2010. We increased the room occupancy tax from 4% to 6%.
okay.
There was a local option allowance at that time to increase the tax from 4 to 6 or up to 6, as well as adopt a meals tax. We did both of those at that special town meeting.
So you've been collecting the 6% rooms tax since 2010. So a short-term rental is defined in the law, in the new law, and it is basically anything that where there's a transfer of occupancy in any house or unit that is not a hotel, a motel, or a bed and breakfast establishment. And I'll tell you that a bed and breakfast establishment is 4 or more rooms in a bed and breakfast where you that includes breakfast, basically. But that definition has not changed. Now, it's important, and this was why the law, there was a delay in enacting this law, because the governor wanted to insert an exemption. And the final law does have this exemption, which is the tax on short-term rentals does not apply to anyone who rents their home on a short-term basis for less than 14 days a year. So those individuals are not subject to this tax.
14 days or less than 14 days? Because
I knew you would ask me
federal-
that question.
The federal tax
14
is
days or
14
less.
days.
Yeah.
14, it's the match the federal.
Right. Now, the other thing that's important is a short-term rental is any rental of up to 31 days. If you rent your house for more than 31 days, you are not subject, you're not a short-term rental, so you're not subject to this tax. Okay?
You need to go to
You
the
have to
mic,
come
please.
to the mic, Noni.
For 32 days, can there be multiple units of 32 days during the year and they not get taxed?
If you rent your house for a month that has 31 days, well, if you rent your house for a period of time in excess of 31 days, you're not subject to this tax. So there's nothing that would prevent you from doing that for the month of
June, July, and August?
well, that's more than 31. That's more than 31 days.
So you could do that, and you're not subject to the tax?
No, because you've rented it for 3 months.
So that's what I'm
It's in,
asking.
yeah. So it would be in the aggregate. You can't get around the law.
Any more than 32 days at all?
You could.
So if you rent your house for the months of June, July, and August consecutively
To one party.
to one party,
Okay, well, I think that's...
that's in
the
excess
question.
of the
One party.
31 days.
No, but she's
So
asking.
you're not
can do-
subject to the. You're not.
That's not what I mean.
No,
You
she-
can
what
do
she's asking-
multiple
John.
32-day rentals.
Yes.
What about multiples? I'm gonna rent May, I'm gonna rent September, and I'm gonna rent December. Now I have an aggregate, so I get taxed on all of it.
If each of those rentals is 32 days or longer, they're exempt.
Right.
But there's not 32 days.
It doesn't matter. What I'm getting at is, so if you rent more than 32 days,
You do not fall under this law.
that's.
To one person.
So it's defined as a change of occupancy of more than 31 days. And the change of occupancy obviously is what it says it is. It's if you rent to somebody else. So, okay? Now, there's been a lot of confusion about this law, and I've heard a lot of questions, and I've seen a lot of things in writing, and, you know, we're certainly anticipating that the Department of Revenue is going to issue some guidance on this. They've already done some preliminarily, and, you know, so we're all going to have to stay tuned on this, because ultimately that's, you know, basically the Department of Revenue is going to make some of these interpretation decisions. But what I'm giving you tonight is my best analysis of the law. Now, because the town already has the 6% local option tax, you do not have to accept this law again. So on July 1st, any short-term rental on Nantucket, for which a contract was signed on January 1st, 2019 or later, will be subject to both the state tax and the local option tax. So if you're a homeowner, you're going to pay 5.7% in state tax. And, I'm sorry?
Tenant.
Yeah, for the tenant, yes, that's right. The tenant, it will be responsible to pay, and that can be a provision in your lease, depending upon how you want to do that. But in addition, there's a 6% local option tax that will also be collected. And then, as it is under the current law, on a quarterly basis, you will receive from the Commonwealth the 6% tax for that rental.
They're saying that the reporting requirement is going to be monthly.
That's the money that's coming back.
This is the money coming back from the Commonwealth. I believe it comes back quarterly.
It does.
Yeah.
But John, we're still on the 6%?
Yes.
What if we would like to do a lower number than 6%, and
Right.
we wanted to roll it back to 2 or 3%, or
Right.
1%, or some other lower?
I was getting to that, actually.
Yeah.
So if the town decided that you wanted to lower that tax, it requires a town meeting vote, and you could do that at your 2019 annual town meeting. You would amend your acceptance of the law, and you would specify what the new percentage rate would be, and that would go into effect for July 1st.
And that requires.
Fortunately, we can't just do that for short-term rentals.
No.
It has to be done across the board for rooming houses, hotels, et cetera.
There's nothing in this law that allows the town to pick and choose to distinguish among various establishments. So it would be across the board for everybody. Motel, hotel, short-term rental.
And it requires a majority vote of town meeting.
Majority vote of town
And
meeting.
no ballot question.
And no ballot question. That's correct.
Just to be clear, the procedure.
Now, there are two other potential, they don't call them taxes, they call them a community impact fee. They require local acceptance, and it would allow the town, if accepted at town meeting, to charge a 3% community impact fee on professionally managed units, okay, which are defined as one of two or more short-term rental units that are located in the same city or town, operated by the same operator, and are not located in a single-family, two-family, or three-family dwelling that includes the operator's primary residence. Now, unlike the local option tax, this community impact fee is paid directly to the town. And the town must spend at least 35% of that on either affordable housing or infrastructure projects.
So can you define primary residence in terms of, if I'm a seasonal, I live here, I'm a seasonal resident, my primary residence is in Boston. Is that considered a primary resident too? If I've got a home and a cottage, I rent out the cottage?
I hadn't thought about that question, Jim, to be totally honest with you. So I'll have to look at that. But a primary residence, in my view, is that you're occupying that residence at least, 6 months out of the year plus 1 day.
Okay, we'll see that. That has a lot of implications
Right.
for people who are here for 3 months and rent out a cottage.
But we're not talking about the local option room occupancy tax.
No, I
We're only
understand.
talking
Yeah.
about this community impact fee. And I believe there'll be a recommendation from administration that the town not pursue that at this point.
Okay, great.
And the second one is a 3% community impact fee for each transfer of occupancy of a short-term rental that is located within a 2 or 3 family dwelling that includes the operator's primary residence. So there's professionally managed, and then there are these up to 3 units where the operator has his primary residence in that facility. So that again is a 3% community impact fee.
I think we have a question.
At Penny Dye, 17 Warren Street, Town. I just wanted to point out that the community impact fee according to the legislation, is to be paid by the owner of the property.
Right. And that's directly to the town.
And the town would have to have the staffing in place to collect that tax.
Yes.
Which currently the other tax is collected.
Yes, so we're going to get to that when we talk about potential bylaws that you could enact. So I don't know whether this is of interest to the town, but there is based upon the Municipal Modernization Act in 2016, the town can, by a 2/3 vote of town meeting, designated that a minimum of 25% of we'll just say of this tax in particular, can be dedicated to a stabilization fund. It can be an existing stabilization fund, including your general stabilization fund, or it can be a new one. That's a local acceptance statute. It requires a majority vote of town meeting, and there's no ballot question. Okay. Now, if you do that, it's not only a 2/3 vote to designate that percentage, but if you wanted to withdraw that from, at a future town meeting, that's also a 2/3 vote. Okay, so that's sort of the overview of how the new tax is going to work. There is a whole nother section of this law which creates the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund. And if you're not Nantucket and if you're not a town in Dukes County, but you're in Barnstable County, you are automatically in the fund and you cannot withdraw for a period of 1 year. In Nantucket's case, if the DEP makes a determination that your comprehensive wastewater management plan is substantially equivalent to the 208 area-wide wastewater management plan that covers the towns on the Cape, then Nantucket will be in this fund as well. And if you're in that fund, there is an additional 2.75% of occupancy tax that is collected, and it will go directly into this fund.
If DEP puts us in by determination,
Yes.
can we opt out immediately, or do we also have to wait 1 year like Barnstable?
Well, that's a really good question. You're in, the day you get that letter from DEP, you're in the fund.
And we're not sure how that process gets initiated.
We're not sure how that, if you're interested in doing that, my recommendation would be that you, with the help of your wastewater consultant, you prepare a request to DEP with an analysis of why your CWMP is equivalent to the 208 area. I mean, you're going to have some justification to submit that to DEP. Then you're in the fund and you can't withdraw for a year. So it begs the question, could you at the 2019 annual town meeting vote to withdraw from the fund, even though you're technically not in it yet, because you won't have that determination most likely by that date? I think that would be okay as long as the effective date in the vote was a year from when the act itself became effective.
I think that's a good idea, personally.
And the act became effective March 28th, 2000, and I'm sorry, it will become effective March 28th, 2019. And you might ask me, well, how did he come up with that? So the general rule is that a law becomes effective 90 days after it is approved, meaning signed by the governor, unless there's an emergency preamble in the act, which means it then takes effect immediately. So my interpretation, and I've confirmed this with the Governor's Office of Legal Counsel, is that the act was approved on December 28th. 90 days from that is March 28th. So you could not withdraw prior to that date. Now, if you never submit that request to DEP, and DEP doesn't make that determination on its own accord, which I suppose they still could do, then you're never in the fund in the first place. Okay? So if you're in the fund...
Can I just get a clarification?
Oh, you got to come to the mic.
Edward Sanford, 12 Dock Rider Drive. So the state can act on its own accord regardless of what the town wants in terms of this Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund. I mean, the DEP can just say, you're in the fund, and town meeting has, the only town meeting vote that can be taken is to opt out? Okay.
This was
Now,
new information today.
Would DEP make that determination without a request from the town? I don't know, but there's nothing in the law that requires the town to make that request in the first instance.
You got to come up to the mic. Sorry.
While he's coming up, have we financially modeled this versus the WIF, and do we know what?
Ryan's going to be after that.
Okay.
Ron Bamber, 28 Washington Pond. I just have a question. You mentioned duplexes or triplexes?
Yes.
When you were just talking, so if I have a duplex, which I do, you mean I rent it year round, am I going to have to pay a tax?
No.
No.
If you have a lease for a year,
Yeah, it's a year.
that exceeds 31 days, you're not subject to the short-term rental tax.
So what if you rent a room in your house, but you rent it for more than 14 days, you're exempt too, right? I don't rent rooms, but my daughter does.
32.
No, if you don't rent that room for more than 14 days in any calendar year, you're not subject to the tax. If you rent it, and that doesn't have to be consecutive, you could rent it for 5 days in
If you
July
rent
and
3 months in the summer, 4 months, then you don't have to pay a tax on it, right?
if the transfer of occupancy is more than 31 days.
Yeah.
Same person, 32 days.
Yep.
Okay? All right. God, this is hard work.
So I think we want to kind of get to what decisions we need to make as a board, which will probably actually take a vote next week as a full board. And then if you have I'll take questions, but then I'll take a period of public comment, if that's okay. Yep, go for it.
Since the law doesn't take effect for 90 days, which would be March 28th, what is the scenario if I've signed a lease in January for something that they're going to rent in July after July 1st?
You're subject to the tax supplies, the short-term rental tax
Even though the
supply.
law hasn't taken effect?
Correct, because there's a specific provision, a separate provision, that says this Section 3A takes effect on July 1st for rental contracts that were executed on or after January 1st. So you'd be
But what was
subject.
the 90-day part? March
Well, the 90
28th?
days is just the overall act itself takes effect on that date. But there's another specific provision that says it applies to rentals basically on or after July 1st, for which a contract was signed on or after January 1st. So we've talked about the withdrawal, and by the way, that withdrawal requires a 2/3 vote of town meeting. There's a management board set up, and the selectmen appoint one representative from Nantucket if you're in the fund, and that has to be either a member of the Board of Selectmen, the town manager, or a professionally employed staff. That's your decision, who you want to appoint from those categories. In addition, the town manager is automatically an ex officio non-voting member of that board, as is the executive director of the Cape Cod Commission and the executive director of the Martha's Vineyard Commission, but they're non-voting, okay? In Nantucket, and this is something to consider, is you're one of a very few communities where grants and awards from the trust can be for projects for which debt was included prior to the effective date of this act. So any of your outstanding sewer debt could potentially be subject to a grant or financing through this new fund. Okay, so the only thing else I wanted to mention was there's a whole section on local regulation. So you may know that under the law, the state is going to create this registry. The registry is going to identify only the municipality and the street on which the short-term rental exists. You have the option, and by the way, Airbnb has sued the city of Boston that already has such a registry, claiming that there are all sorts of constitutional violations, and that case is in active litigation. You can adopt a bylaw to regulate short-term rentals under this statute. You can establish a licensing procedure, which is what you did, for example, with marijuana at the October special town meeting. You can limit the number of short-term rentals that are available in your community. That's essentially what you did with marijuana as well. It's only 2, but obviously, this is an option. You can have your own registry that can actually identify the street address. And you can adopt, the bylaw can provide for certain health and safety inspections and building permits and, all the things you might want to consider if you're going to be regulating short-term rentals.
But
now,
I read this as it authorizes, but doesn't require. So these are not required that we institute all
That's
these
correct.
rules and regulations and boards and registration and all
right,
that.
that's correct. You can rely, for example, on the state registry, which is going to be an online.
I'm talking about all the rules and regulations.
You're not required to adopt
Okay,
those.
because we've got the Board of Health. We've got a bunch of stuff that covers issues that would be a duplication that's in this law.
Right. So. And as I say in my memo, there's nothing in this law that would preclude the Board of Health from adopting a regulation as opposed to a bylaw dealing with these kinds of health and safety issues.
And this bylaw would require a vote of town meeting if we were to try
A general
and enact.
bylaw would be a majority vote of town meeting. You could also potentially adopt a zoning bylaw to regulate where these short-term rentals could be located, and potentially a special permit use for multiple units. That would be a 2/3 vote of town meeting.
I mean, this whole section is a result of some of the problems I think they're having in the Boston communities with people wandering, they can't find their Airbnbs. People are living in a neighborhood and someone rents a house and has a huge raging party there. And, there's all sorts of problems that really, short of a couple weekends, kind of don't apply to us.
Right.
So I'm not so sure.
And I was advising that you move cautiously on this
On this part of it, yeah.
because I want to see how the litigation turns out. I hate to see you establish a registry that has an address and then be sued and have to defend that. So, in recap.
Can I go back to the sewer fund before you recap?
Sure.
They're going to equitably distribute the money.
Yes.
How do they define equitable?
Isn't that a good question?
That's why I'm asking. That's why you get paid.
He who has the votes
and
gets
I'm
the-
here as a volunteer.
And I do address that in my memo. That it's not defined. It's the management board that is ultimately going to make that determination. You will have a say on that management board if you are in the fund. I think it's fair to say that you shouldn't rely on dollar for dollar receiving subsidies in proportion to the amount of tax collected in Nantucket. That's not what equitable means.
Right, and that's what worries me. I'd be happier with the whiff in knowing we're getting every penny and doing what we need to do rather than having to go and politic off island once a month for our fair benefit.
Right, but I think you may find that because Nantucket is so far along in wastewater planning, and you have so much outstanding debt, that you might be in a pretty good position to get some of that money.
So it might make sense to be there early for the first few years and then withdraw?
Well, but if we
that's certainly a possibility.
We can't withdraw right away.
That's certainly a possibility. So to recap.
Then we need to see that laid out, I would.
Question?
Ken Bogrand at 1 Farmer Street. Are you satisfied with the constitutionality of this Section 6? Because when I read it, it says that the town could define the areas where you can rent, the town can define the number of days that you can rent, the town can major limit what you can do with your fee simple property that you own. That just seems to me extraordinary takeaway of the rights of ownership. I mean, I can understand the need to be able to have some rules and regulations, but as I read that language, I was reading George Orwell's 1984.
Haven't you read your zoning bylaw? Your zoning bylaw does that multiple times, limits where uses can occur, and that's constitutional. Limits, requires special review through a special permit depending upon the size of the operator's establishment. So, Ken, in answer to your question, I would be very surprised, but it will not be the first time, that provision would be declared unconstitutional. I'm more concerned with the registry provision.
Okay.
And that's why I'm advising caution.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. So to recap in terms of
Can I ask one more question
Sure.
on that vein? These type of provisions, do those need to be initiated by us, or could this be initiated by a citizen's petition with 17 signatures?
Yes. 10 signatures.
Or I'm thinking of another one that's created a lot of havoc that had 17.
Yeah. Yes, it could be. And if the bylaw is adopted and approved by the Attorney General, it's the law of the island, so to speak.
So someone could.
Well, not for this year.
Not for this year, but for next year. And we
Yes.
just need to understand this.
Yes, that's correct.
Institute an article saying you can only have short-term rentals in LUG1.
Yes.
Just something.
Yes.
Something to think about.
And can I just ask John one more clarification? Going back to my earlier question, then it's a little bit unclear as to whether refraining from submitting our CWMP to DEP is actually withdrawing.
I think I don't mean to put words in your mouth, Rita, but I think if you just decline to submit that request to DEP, there is no guarantee that you won't be in that fund because DEP makes the determination even without your request.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is if we wanted more time to look at whether the WIF was better suited versus joining this particular fund, are we officially withdrawn? Is there an opportunity by refraining from making the request from
Okay.
DEP? Because there's a time limitation. It says that if you would withdraw, then you can't remove funds from the fund for 2 years.
No, no, you cannot. You are, well, no, that's right. You are ineligible if you withdraw, and then you vote later to join.
Right.
You are precluded for 2 years from receiving any subsidies. Well, that's the problem.
My question.
I think if that's the problem, and I'm going to try to get some clarification from DOR on that. But if you don't want to be in this fund, my definite recommendation would be do not request the determination from DEP. And we would have to decide at that point whether you want to just put the withdrawal article on the warrant for this year to take effect on March 28th of 2020, and then argue that that was effective. That was an effective withdrawal, regardless of what the DEP might determine on its own.
Okay, thank you.
And again, while we're on this again, the same question I had with the other, will there be advantages of being in this fund? Will there be other, we don't know.
I'm going to let Brian address that because that's more of a financing question, and I know he's had quite a bit of discussions about this, so he might be able to answer that question better. So to recap, you can vote at this upcoming town meeting to reduce the percentage, whatever percent.
Local option.
The local option. Whatever you do, however, the short-term rental tax will start to be collected on July 1st at whatever percentage is in place at that point, either the existing 6% or some other percent. If you wanted to adopt either of those sections that allow for a community impact fee of 3%, and this is a little bit of a nuance, but if you wanted to do that, you have to adopt the professionally managed 3%. Oh. And if you do that in a separate vote, you can also adopt the owner-occupied exemption. But I don't think that's the recommendation. If you wanted to set aside some of this money to a stabilization fund, you could do this at the upcoming town meeting. And if you wanted to consider adopting some kind of a bylaw, you could do that now. Although, as I said, I'm recommending that you maybe proceed with caution on that.
Does it take 2/3 or majority to take money out of the stabilization fund now?
2/3. 2/3.
So that's not a change?
No.
Okay.
Okay?
I guess I have one more question about this water protection fund tax, just so I understand it. So the DEP at sort of any given point can say that under this new law, Nantucket is a part of the water protection fund without any, and so when they make that determination, the tax has to be collected, has to be collected as of July 1st.
Well,
does town meeting have to vote to confirm the DEP ruling, or when the DEP rules that we are in the protection fund, we're in it until we opt out?
Right, I understand your question. So, unfortunately, I cannot give you an absolutely clean answer on that. And the reason for that is there's a provision in the law, and it's cited in my memo, that essentially says, bear with me for just one moment. So a municipality included in the water protection fund, I'm sorry.
It says June 1.
Okay. So section 11 says the transfer of occupancy of, we'll just say, short-term rental in a municipality that becomes a member of the fund after June 1st, 2019 shall be subject to the excise. On the first day of a calendar quarter after it has joined the fund as the municipality may designate. So nobody likes seeing sausage made, right? And this has really bothered me, this provision, and we need to get clarification on it. I think one way to interpret this is you get the letter from DEP, you're in the fund, and then you are a member of that fund on the first calendar day of the quarter after that. And when it says as the municipality may designate, I think there's a very good argument that that's an executive function for the select board to determine. Now, I've seen in writing opinions that this means town meeting has to opt in. I'm not convinced of that. It's not an unreasonable argument, but I don't think that's what was intended. So stay tuned on that question. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Yes.
Brian and I have been talking about numbers on this,
Good.
and he's got some estimates.
Can you put that? Yeah. Can we try to expand it too, just to make it easier to? Can we go full screen or no? It doesn't go full screen? Okay. So since this has come in, we've done a lot of work trying to figure out, it's been very somewhat difficult to try to figure out what exactly,
Do you have copies for?
where this is going to end up. What we've put together really quickly is 6, 5, 4, and 3% options, which are up on the screen. In order to try to do this, we first attempted to calculate how many properties may be able to avail themselves of short-term rentals. We came up with 8,940, and the way that we did that is we took all residential properties currently from the assessor's office. We subtracted the approximately 2,307 properties that have the residential exemption for them. And we basically did that because we didn't believe that we believe they may fall under the 14 days. So we're trying to be conservative in doing this. We then came down to trying to take a stab at how many actual properties would be rented on the island that would be subject to this tax. We used 2,000 for the purpose of this. I'm certainly can program this or run this at any estimate people would like me to do. The weekly rental amount was another difficulty. We tried to convert it to weekly to make this as easy as possible to do. We settled on 6,000 because we know that there's a very wide range on what the rentals on the island go for. And trying to be conservative, we estimated only 10 weeks. So in every option, those numbers stay the same. The estimated rental income from this is $120 million. At 6%, that would generate $7.2 million on short-term rentals only, not on the lodging establishments. I'll go through what the total would be in a second. At 5%, it would be $6 million. At 4%, we'd generate $4.8 million, and at 3%, would generate $3.6 million. Below that is the estimated Cape and Islands Trust revenue. We've estimated that at $4.9 million. That number is inclusive of both the short-term rentals that we're talking about as well as all the other lodging establishments. So we took 2.75 of 120 million and got approximately 3.3 million. And we did a calculation to attempt to back into what the revenue on the island generated from the lodging establishments is and combine the two to generate $4.6 million. That if we were in the trust would be sent to them. It actually is sent directly to DEP to administer through the SRF program.
Could you just go over that one more time? The Cape and Island Trust revenue, do you want to explain that?
So that's the trust fund that we have to decide whether we would want to be in for the 2.75. So the 4.9 million is a combination of what would 2.75.
That's the water fund.
That's the water fund. Yes, that's correct.
So I think well, I don't know. That's good to know that. Okay, thank you.
So currently, as of fiscal 18, which is the last actual data we have, we received $3.622 million in rooms tax at the 6% rate. Below that, we have calculated any change in the local option obviously would have an impact on the 3.6 million that we collect. So we've calculated what that change would be reducing the tax to 5, 4, or 3%. Projected what that amount would be directly from the lodging establishments, and then the bottom line is the total estimated revenue between the 7.2 in the first example and the 3.6, and then going down all the way to 3%, which would generate 5.4 million, or approximately 1.8 million dollars above what we are currently generating this year.
So what's the percent that's kind of a break even? I know it's hard to know, but I mean,
well, anything below
something little less than 3%.
Anything less than 2.5% would essentially take us below what we're calculating now, based on these numbers. I mean, that this is certainly the best estimate, unless people want to give me more solid data. But I don't know that everybody wants to provide their data, so it's the best estimate that we can come up with at this point. Anything less than 3% would start to get us closer to the 3.6 million, which would mean we'd be breaking even or starting to lose money if we reduced it below that.
This obviously this is a big step for the town, and what is not public information is rental data from real estate offices. I'm thinking though that if the town approached, there are probably no more than 15 rental offices that probably handle 80% of the rental business on the island, that they might be willing to give out some, hard data about what they generate in terms of rental revenue for their homeowners. We're a fairly big office. I assume we do a fairly good percentage, well above 10%, maybe not 30%, but we do a big chunk of rental business. And looking at those numbers, they seem really high to me. And I'm not arguing about them.
High meaning the 6,000 seems high?
The estimated rental income.
The 6,000 seems high.
The 120 million.
Okay, no. But the weekly rental amount of 6,000 seems high.
That's very low.
No.
Well, on it,
that's what generates the.
Yeah, but I guess I'm not going to argue about the methodology. What I'm saying is, I think what maybe because of the magnitude of this new law, that maybe our real estate brokerage community would be willing, we're not going to publish office numbers, but you might, if you came to us and said, what are your figures, I would be happy to share that information privately. So you could get hard data, and there are really only, I'm saying 15 offices. There might be 10 offices that do 95% of the brokered lease business. Then you have to worry about what Airbnb is generating in terms of rental revenue and VRBO, which is probably a more difficult number to come up with. But again, I'm going to say that maybe 80% of the rental business on Nantucket is handled through local brokerages, maybe more. I mean, I don't, everybody said, oh, you're going to see so much impact. This was 5 years ago when VRBO started to really take prominence, that we would see big impact on our rental business, and we have not, which doesn't, which is just anecdotal, but we have not. Airbnb really, probably the impact that Airbnb has had on Nantucket is really in the hotel business, because the people that I know that use Airbnb on Nantucket are coming for 3 or 4 nights. They don't rent houses. They want to save money. They don't want to pay $500 a night on a hotel room. They might, come with, they might need 2 rooms, and you can get an Airbnb for $300 a night versus paying $600 or $700 a night in a hotel. So that certainly is a number that, because of this new tax, needs to be sort of considered. But I don't think it's a big chunk it hasn't taken a big chunk out of the house rental business, I don't think. So I
don't want to make this too complex, but information that you send to the town becomes public. If you reported it to a third party, say?
Well, they don't have to know where the information, I mean, if somebody from the town came to us and said, what's your number? We're assuming that their town's not going to say
I
Great
just
Point
didn't know- I
Properties
didn't know if
generated
the board
this.
of realtors might want to put it all together and give it to the town. But if you're comfortable doing that, that's fine.
I think, I want the town to be well educated. I mean, there's not an aggregator. It's not like, a sale, which is public information. We keep track of that all day long, but the rental business is not public. So I think in some level, I would hope that, my fellow, competitors would be willing to sit down with the town and give you guys some fairly good hard data that you could start to understand what the impacts of various tax rates might be in terms of revenue. So,
Ken Bogren, just an interesting insight. I did a back of the envelope assessment in terms of what I thought the numbers might look like before coming to the meeting, I came. I think you're a little bit high, Brian, in terms of your 6% option around 7 million. The number that I came to using different assumptions, but was that the town would generate somewhere between 4.5 to 5.5 million, as opposed to 7.5 million at 6%. Again, I think that when you've done your calculation, you're using 10 weeks. That's much a longer period of time. Your rental rate, I think, is a little bit low if you're going to be averaging out over the entire scope of the thing, and so there are sort of a back of the envelope suggestion says that your numbers are in the ballpark, but they're a little bit high, but they're not that far out of whack. And so if you take it down to 3, 5, or 4% or 3%, you're still going to have an increase in terms of what comes into the town by reducing the amount for the hotels. But you're, in fact, not going to have a dramatic impact on the entire community with respect to a tax that has never been there before, with respect to a portion of the rental activity, which is a significant contributor to the economy of this town. I just had one other question, if it was possible. Over the last 3 years, the hotel tax has generated somewhere between $12 to $14 million, as shown in the state records. There is a mistake in the state record for 2017 where they've got 2 quarters that are just absolutely incorrect. But in addition, the town has collected over $4 million from the meals tax over that same period of time.
Well, the total collected is over $4 million. We collect between $900,000 and $1 million in meals tax. So the total between rooms and meals tax is over $4 million, but the largest majority of that actual is the rooms tax itself.
Right.
Yes.
But my question was is the town in a position to sort of advise the community how that money was spent? Because of the fact that that's always been an issue. The initial idea behind the hotel tax was, in fact, that it should be to support initiatives supporting the summer visitor community. That was what was done in the early years, and then that fell off the table. So I'm just wondering if there is a sense for the community to understand what that money was used for, and are there plans that the town has, in fact, for what the money would be used for moving forward if the fact this is going to be implemented, but at what level it's going to be implemented?
I don't know if the town manager would like to.
We spent a lot of time several years ago when there was an effort to more restrict the rooms tax to particular areas. And we produced a lot of numbers that showed all of the areas where it goes. It's a bit fungible. So, I mean, we could certainly say it all goes to summer seasonal services, and I would argue that quite a bit of it does, but it funds the general fund. It is a general revenue.
Okay, I was just looking from a public relations point of view in terms of being able to help explain this tax to the tenants coming in. Yeah, you can tell them that we're one of the last states to be able to implement this because everybody else has done it, but it really helps with respect to an explanation of the fact that it is for the benefit of these people who are paying the tax, that they're getting the benefit of it with respect to what's going on within the community is the point that I want to make.
I think we should be careful that we shouldn't create an expectation on the part of this summer's visitors that sending 5 point whatever % 5.7% of the states can increase the quality of their experience.
Great, thank you.
I think Ken was talking about this up to 6% local
No, I understand.
option on that, perhaps. So right now, we have a 5.7% state tax that applies to short-term rentals, as well as lodging, other lodging definitions. Under consideration, well, right now, actually legally, we have a 6% local option tax. Okay, so we've gone now on short-term rentals from 0 to 11.7% effective July 1st. Under consideration is an additional 2.75% for the water protection fund. That puts it to 14.45%.
Yep.
And then up to another 3%, that's 14.45% on the tenant, up to another 3% on the homeowner of the property. From 0 to 17.45%. Significant.
Right, and I think one important thing is that I have not made a recommendation to the town manager or the board about implementing either one of the community impact fees, because I think based on reading them that they would be difficult for the town to manage and understand which ones would be applicable, and as well as the fact that the local option tax I like because the money is remitted to the state and they send it to me. I don't have to worry about being in the I'll say it again, I guess I don't have to worry about running and collecting it from everyone if we were to implement them.
Mm-hmm.
So my recommendation to the town manager is that we hold off on implementing those and review whether they make sense for the town at this point or not.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm here as a messenger. I'm not here in my capacity as a real estate broker, but I want people in this community to understand the impact of this. This pile of paper is emails and letters from homeowners who are no longer going to rent their properties, and from tenants who are no longer going to come here. And these are primarily people at what I would call the price-sensitive end of the market. If the law was truly about equity between the lodging industry and the rentals of private homes, the tax would have targeted stays of less than 1 week. The people that are going to be most impacted by this are the owners of these more affordable rental properties and, of course, the guests that rent them. Many of these owners are people who live on this island year-round and rent their properties in order to afford to stay here. I have long-term tenants who budget all year to come for 1 week at Fisher's Landing for $3,000. They no longer bring a car because of the cost of bringing the car on the ferry. They don't eat out, they eat in, and these are the kind of people that won't be able to come here. We're already one of the most expensive places in this country to vacation, and I just feel this is going to make it more exclusionary in the future. As for the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund, oh, first of all, thank you, Mr. Giorgio, for such a comprehensive and good explanation. But I urge the Board of Selectmen and leadership to do a thorough evaluation of where Nantucket is with our wastewater needs and where we've come before recommending that we commit to that additional 2.75% on our visitors, which may or may not come back to the community in an equitable way. Nantucket would have only 1 voting seat on the Oversight Board. I just want to finish by saying I'm sure there are many other unintended consequences of this legislation that we have yet to realize. The law was rushed through during informal session at the end of the year with no infrastructure in place to implement it. Please consider an amount lower than the 6% on the local option portion of the tax for this initial year. It is important that we act in an informed and measured way, giving us the opportunity to evaluate the impacts as we move forward. Thank you.
So Penny, not to put you on the spot, but would you, for me, I'd be looking at a rate that would make it kind of a zero-sum game. And I didn't know if you as an individual, as a citizen, had, because the range of 3 to 6%, I mean, is, so if we're at 2.5 or 3, then it's kind of a zero-sum game, and I don't know if that's, because I don't have a stack nearly that big.
There's more. I just checked my email.
But we all have lots of calls and communications, and it's not only the impact on the people who aren't going to come here. The people aren't going to rent, but it's all the impact of the people who are, it's difficult for them to live here and earn money, the landscapers, the housekeepers, so it's, those people won't have a job because those people aren't going to rent their houses.
The other thing, I wasn't particularly going to get into this, but when any of us stay in a hotel or a commercial establishment, we have an assurance that they have met certain health and safety standards and inspections. That is not the case with the rental of a private home. I understand that this law provides the ability to do that. We are years from any kind of structure to do that. So I think to compare the rental of a private home to a commercial establishment, they're just two different things.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And so,
Sorry. Suzette Brown, I own property. We rent property on the island. One question. When you decide on what the tax is going to be, it's going to be retroactive. And I have a rental inquiry today. What do I charge them? Do I not charge them 6%? Do I charge them 3%? Do I charge them nothing? And then in July when they come, I say, by the way, you still owe me money? Or do I owe that? I don't know who's supposed to pay that if it's retroactive. That's one thing. The other thing is just to reiterate what Penny was saying. We don't rent $6,000. We rent little bits, just enough to make it through the year so we can keep our property. This is going to really kill us. And we may have to sell all our property. And I don't really want to have to sell it all and make a big development. It's going to be a tough thing. It doesn't seem like much money, but when you're talking 2%, 3%, 6% on top and top and top, and it comes out to 11 or 15%, it's a lot. I already had one woman cancel on me. I have somebody else just thinking about it, and they're not really sure they're going to take it. So I'm already losing money. If you guys can keep that in mind. If you can let me know what I'm supposed to charge the people now would be great, because I don't know.
So John, what do we do in that case?
well, people are renting their houses now.
Right.
If the board is inclined to recommend to town meeting that you reduce the percentage, that's not going to be voted until April 1st, and there's no way around that. So I think these homeowners are going to have to make that decision of they could certainly charge the rent and then remit it if, in fact, town meeting votes to reduce the percentage. I think there are a number of ways you can deal with that. One thing I stood up for was to make sure that everyone is aware that you can only amend your percentage once in a 12-year period. So, did I say 12 years?
Yes.
In a 12-month period. Sorry about that. So, so if you reduce the percentage now, I guess the concern would be, so whose numbers are right and what's the real number going to be? Right. So, because Brian said you have $2,000 in unused levy capacity, so it may not affect this year as much as it would 2020, but once you change it, you have to wait another year before you amend it again.
But right now, people should be charging 11.7
That's a safe
to be safe.
Yes.
Except for this 2.75. It's the wild card.
I was told that the local option doesn't go into effect for leases until March 28th.
That's not correct. No. The law specifically says if you sign a lease on January 1st or later, you are subject to the tax, and it goes into effect on July 1st.
Well, I got that information from the Mass DOR. So, this is...
That's the problem.
Well, when we added the 6%...
They came from very high up in DOR. The woman that we're talking to was given to us by Dylan Fernandez and Julian Sear. It's not like I just called up Mass DOR. So now, and I've told
Edward, make sure you're getting on the mic.
Sorry. And so this is the information that we're sending out to thousands of people. And I've just been told I'm wrong. This is absurd. And I'm not, you guys are the messengers, but this is state government. I mean, you're making us look like idiots, you know, and there are clients, there are customers. I mean, I can't even, I mean, Matt, it's like if I said, you want to charge $8 for a roast beef sandwich, and I say, no, you got to charge $20, and then I call you tomorrow and said, no, you got to charge 15. I mean, it's really bad.
Well, that's what happened.
So
What happened to me when it went from 5 to 6. It went from 5 to 6, and we were going into a recession. And we were, and this is where I think you're facing. When we did when we went 5%, the original 5% option, I think it was a third, and we sequenced it in over 3 years. And I'm thinking similarly for this, and sequence it in and actually see what the actual impact is. Make it revenue neutral, or a little more than revenue neutral, based on best numbers we can get, and then see what the impact is. And Penny's got a pile of things. I have a buddy who's a finance guy. He's given me reams and reams of stuff, and it's it's his break even after 3 weeks, or after 2 weeks, and after 3.5 weeks, and at this amount, it's break even after 4 weeks. So there's going to be all sorts of changes that are going to happen that we can't even predict.
Well, the issue, I mean, again, I sent Penny the email. I mean, I can send it to you. This is from a woman whose job it is to give us the information. And she said point blank, the local option doesn't go into effect until March, for leases executed March 28th or later. So we're sending out leases without the local option tax on it.
Well,
and town council is saying I'm wrong. Okay. Well,
this is the difficulty that I'm having.
We need help, and we need it like tomorrow morning. So,
this is government.
1 o'clock tomorrow, Libby and Greg and I are attending a meeting on the Cape, and we think there may be a DOR representative there, and we will certainly try to get clarification on that question and a number of other questions. But the law is very clear. It applies to rentals beginning July 1st if you've had a contract on or after January 1st. So we'll endeavor to get you an answer.
But the interpretation was coming from Edwards, and that the 5.7 applies, but the 6% doesn't apply until March 28th. And I'm just doing what I was told.
I understand.
Of course, it's very difficult for me because I operate in the real estate business in many capacities, and I can't answer everyone's questions.
Right. I can't either, if that's any consolation.
Being a microphone hog, this is the last time I'll talk. We were told, Edward and I, by our state representatives to rely on what DOR was telling us. So,
Carl, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I just had one comment, and with regards to the Board of Selectmen deciding what percentage to make local option tax, there was prior town meetings where they tried to implement a local tax on short-term rentals in the past, and that was shot down. So I just want to make sure that that's remembered, that the town in the past has voted against a tax on short-term rentals. Now, realizing we're there, I think lowering the impact of that tax would be in the town's best interest.
Oh, I thought you said you were going to come and shoot us down again. No. If we were going to lower it, I was going to fight with you.
Indeed, through the years, it has always been kind of a bastion for, Lark Jacobs, 5 Clifton Street, Sconset. Through the years, it's always been a bastion for the local year-round community to be able to rent as a support vehicle, to pay mortgage, whatever, to support their ability to live here on this island. I think it's really deplorable that I really appreciated Penny's comments. If this were truly an equitable comparison, to tax the under 1 week rental, that would make some rhyme or reason. That would be somewhat, supportive of, or comparative, equal to, people don't stay for 3 weeks in a hotel generally. And to say that you're going to meet that same number of income by lowering the rental, the tax, that's shifting the burden away from the hotels and putting that burden on the shoulders of the local community. And I think it's horrendous. Thank you.
Well, we can't differentiate between the two.
That's because, too late. That's because that law was put into place, what, a month before Christmas or whenever that was. Too late. I think it's horrendous.
Hi, I'm Christina Manka, 13 Parson Lane. And I just wanted to, I'm new to Nantucket just a couple of years, but I have made my living through short-term rentals and Airbnb and HomeAway and VRBO for a decade in 5 different cities in 2 different countries. So I just wanted to represent the voice of people who make 100% of their living that way. And I understand that there's a tax that, you know, that is coming, and there's been a good long run with no tax. So, but I also just want to thank the real estate agents for coming and putting those piles, because, you know, as a person who rents it on my own, I do the work all by myself. I'm getting some feedback from it as well. And to go from 0 to the full extent of what we can tax under the law, I would ask that we slow that down and use some restraint. You know, I mean, the history of Nantucket is something that's, I think, very poignant, and I think we just need to harken back to our founding fathers who, you know, advocated for fair taxation and good judgment. So I would request that you also consider not the full 6%. The 5.7 we have no control over, but not that full 6%, and something much lower. We can, in time, we could always raise it if we found that, you know, people responded to it. But the thing to remember is this, that there's zero guarantee that anyone will come for a short-term rental. And it's a very precious resource we have on this island. And we just, you know, I'm always very grateful to my renters. So, thanks.
Tom?
Good evening, Tom Dixon, State Representative Dylan Fernandez's office. I know the representative was not happy with the way this bill went through at the end of December. It did go through at the last minute. The bill had been in consideration for quite a long time and passed sort of at the last second before the legislative calendar expired, so it wouldn't have to be refiled in the new session because all the bills would expire at the end of the 2-year period. The guidance from DOR was unavailable. I know the representative was frustrated that that was not ready to go on January 1st, day 1. And Mr. Sanford and Penny and Ms. Day, that we would have been corresponding about that. And hopefully we can get some proper guidance. But yeah, we would go off exactly the same thing, that the guidance that you had. So hopefully that we can reach out and get some proper guidance and that can correlate with what Mr. Giorgio is saying. Thank you.
Okay, so
I just want to make one comment, 2 comments. One is Libby and I attended a meeting with this as the topic, the Selectmen's meeting on the Cape. And this is definitely all the concerns that are being brought up tonight are concerns across the Cape, and really concerned about what it means for ability of renters, future renters, potential renters to be able to afford, whether it's here or anywhere on the Cape. The other comment I want to make, this is probably not going to be popular with this particular audience at all, but I do just want to speak from the point of view that part of the reason we have this tax has come into place is, yes, leveling the playing field, but it's also because short-term rentals have a significant impact on communities. And the towns have been unable to capture the impact to infrastructure, to water, to traffic, and to affordable housing. And so short-term rentals arguably have some of the biggest impact on things like affordable housing. And we're here trying to figure out how we're going to fund affordable housing programs, fund some of our water programs, fund some of the other things. So while I am very sensitive to the concerns about increasing taxes all in one go, I think we really have to understand that while there's massive benefit, huge benefit to the economy, the town also, there's significant impact to the community on all the things that we're talking about all the time. So.
John?
So I don't want to belabor this argument, but I have in my hand the Department of Revenue FAQs, which just came out at the end of last week. And it says that the new law imposes state and local excises on short-term rentals of property for more than 14 days in a calendar year, starting July 1st, for which a rental contract was entered into on or after January 1st. So that's the only thing I have from DOR, and we'll try to get clarification tomorrow.
Okay, so I.
Cindy Lenhart, 25 Dukes Road. The local tax, does that, all that money go locally? Has nothing to do with the state? And you guys are going to determine how much it is. Can you also determine if a lease, if you aren't going to tell us what the tax will be until the 28th of March, can't we have it begin all leases done between now and the 28th of March can have the state tax very clearly and easily put in there, but we don't know what to put in there for the local tax. Right. So we've got piles of people waiting. We don't know what to put in our contracts. Right. But if the money's going to you, can't we just set it up so it starts a little later?
Right now, the 6% is what it is because that's what we voted as a community in 2009. And this is not, although it's a new tax, it is actually an expansion of the existing hotel
Room
tax.
tax.
So what we're discussing is whether we want to put something forth for town meeting, which I think everyone in here will support, of lowering the 6%. So charge the 6% now, and then hopefully you'll be lowering it because I intend to support a lower rate personally.
And the other taxes, we just don't know what to put in our contracts.
I know.
And it's a contract. We've got, we're busy as can be putting these things together. We don't even know what to put on them.
John, do you
I've never
have any
been
advice?
so worried or frustrated about this kind of stuff.
So I know. Excuse me.
Hold on.
Bill Little, 7 Mill Street. This is really an answer for Cindy, since we're dealing with the same thing. The first tax bill is not due until August 1st. The taxes are collected out of the second payment if there are multiple payments in your lease. So you'll have language in your lease stating that the tax will be up to and it will be due the second payment. Our rental season is such that this matter will be worked out after town meeting. So, and then at which point, when you make your first payment
So
to
you
the
put all
Okay.
4 of those taxes in your lease? Or are you just putting the 2?
Guys, maybe you can
Yeah.
talk about this offline. Jim?
I'm trying to think of some ways we can reduce the uncertainty here, and I know we maybe don't want to take a formal vote on the local option tax till we have a full board, but it would be nice. I hear some consensus that we're not going to get a recommendation from town administration on the 3%. We've had a conversation about the 2.75%, and the concerns about the equitable treatment of Nantucket. And I didn't hear anybody say they were very much opposed to that. So I'd like to make a motion that we will defer implementing those taxes at this time. Taxes or fees, the 3% and the 2.75, just so we can create some, reduce some of the anxiety and the uncertainty.
Would you guys mind if we did more of a consensus on those items? Because it wasn't completely clear on the agenda, and we were going to clarify that next week before taking formal votes.
So we can't vote on it tonight? I'd ask John. Because a consensus isn't a vote, so.
No, it's not. That's correct. But I think what the chair has been referring to is the fact that there wasn't a specific agenda item about taking any votes with respect to what the board would recommend to town meeting. And so the thought was that would be on the agenda next week.
But those two options aren't what in other words, the vote is to not take them to town meeting.
Right. Well,
so
yes.
Why can't we vote on that?
For the reasons I've stated, I think that I mean, I don't want to get into a public discussion about the open meeting law, but I would prefer that no votes be taken tonight specifically because there wasn't a separate agenda item with
All right,
respect
so I'll
to.
withdraw my motion, but feel
And-
strongly that it's unfortunate that we didn't have it on the agenda because
Well, I think
I'd be happy to poll the board.
Yeah.
I think we have a
pull the
majority
board
at
for a
least, and-
consensus. Why don't we do that? Does that?
So I'd be in favor of what I just, obviously, I proposed the motion.
Before we'll come back to that. Can you just give advice on how people should write their leases if you have?
So
any?
I'm not going to give legal advice to anybody except the Board of Selectmen and town officials. I learned that rule 33 years ago. If I were renting my property, I would do what is known. What is known at this point is 5.7% state tax and a 6% local option tax. I think if I were doing it, I might want to put something in my rental contract indicating that there is a possibility of additional taxes which would be due from the tenant, depending upon the outcome of town meeting.
No, the only real additional tax that would be due from the tenant would be the 2.75.
Correct.
Because the 3% would be on the homeowner anyway.
Correct. And I'm going to guess that next week when you take the formal vote, there's not going to be support for the 3% community impact fee. I'm guessing. But there is an outstanding question about the 2.75 and,
Well-
of course, lowering the local option percentage.
So next, I'd like to go to each individual board member and get a few thoughts on where they are. Okay,
No,
start
I,
with you,
I think
Matt.
we should phase it in. I'd like to see the modeling on the other stuff, though I'm not in favor of it at this time. I also, it's interesting, though, it depends whose ox is being gored. You know, there weren't a lot of people here complaining when it went to 6 on the hotels and motels. So, you know, so it is interesting that, you know, so I just think that we have to realize, you know, if we lower it, we're going to be actually giving them a break too, which is a good thing to do, because I think it's been a burden on them, just as it is on my business. So you know, but, and I do think, and I'm sort of with Rita, that this is, what's happened here. I can't, I got to tell you a story. So what's happened here, I'll do it quick. Before Walter Barnaky died, I was fortunate enough to meet with him. And at that point, we were talking a lot about taxes and what you do and everything else. He, at that point, was advising the Lagasse family up in Newburyport. And what he said is, you guys have to be careful and not do the mistakes that Nantucket did. You know, what Nantucket did is they turned every house into a piggy bank, into a rental. And it really has they're doing it all over the hinterlands. It's out in the suburbs. It's everywhere. It's all car dependent. They really, you know, the horse is out of the barn. I'm not saying we can go back, but when he went with his intelligence and with his view of what happened here, he advised them, be careful, don't do it. You know, keep houses as houses and put people on the river, put people in hotels who are eating and drinking and supporting the year-round people who live in Newburyport. A similar situation happened in Telluride. They've tried not to sprawl out into the hinterlands with a bunch of Airbnbs and things. They have 2 main towns, and it works unbelievable. They don't have traffic. They don't have the stuff that we have. They're about 10 or 15 years behind us, but they've planned well and they've designed their town well. And so we have to, as a community, start thinking, how do we want to grow? How do we want to do this? In taxation and getting money back for some of our really important things, in building in the right places where it's affordable and where it's, where it works. We should be thinking about those things more than we do, and not just thinking of our own self-interest. Sorry.
So generally, at this time, you're not in favor of the additional taxes.
No, I think we should phase them in and make it neutral. Yeah.
And you think that we should lower the 6%?
Yes.
In some form.
But I think that we all have to. I think we have to come together as a community and think of everybody, not just ourselves on these issues. Another way to look at this, someone came to me that it's renting at the lower end, and we were running the numbers and going back and forth, and all of a sudden, this person was like, gee whiz, I might be better off renting year round because I won't have these charges, and I'm going to make about the same. I actually might make more. So there may be a small benefit to some of, to some of the people that work for you and clean the windows and do all the other stuff that we really need on the lower end. But none of us know that. We won't know that until we get a year or 2 or 3 in, and hopefully the economy doesn't, tank like it looks like it's going to. Hopefully it doesn't, but we won't know this for 3 to 5 years. But there may be some unintended positive consequences here. Anyway.
Okay, thank you. Jim, I think you made your position pretty clear, but do you want to reiterate it quickly?
So I'm in favor of a kind of a zero-sum game in terms of the local option and not to implement the 3% or the 2.75. I believe that property owners pay property tax, and that covers all the services, whether I'm living in my home or I rent it out to a family of the same number of people that's in my home. I don't see that as an additional burden on the town of Nantucket. So I think we should be living within our means of our property taxes. Thank you.
Rita?
I would mostly agree with Matt. I don't, and I especially don't think the 3% at this stage is something that would be on the table. The 2.75%, the water fees, I'd like to know more about them. I'd like to know more about the WIF. So I suppose at this point, it would probably be a no, but that I would have abstained because I would want to know more information. And again, I think, Jim, while I agree mostly with you, whether it's 6 people living in the house year round or 6 people renting out to 6 people every week for 10 weeks, I think time and time again, the one thing you come back to is it has an impact on affordable housing. Short-term rentals longer-term rentals are likely to turn into short-term rentals. And so with that, I agree with Matt. I think there potentially, there's some point where some of these rentals they might actually make more money doing longer-term, which we need. So, it sounds like there's general consensus, but I'm not quite ready to say no to the 2.75. I just want to know more.
Dawn?
Yes. So where I'm at, and I've gone back and forth about this a lot, I do not support any of the 3% additions on the homeowners. I think they would be extremely cumbersome to monitor them, and they apply to very few entities. I have gone back and forth on the 2.75 because it involves principal forgiveness, but I think that there's too many unknowns to really consider that at this point, and I would only consider it if it was completely offset by a reduction in the 6%, which I don't think we have the room to do. I would be more supportive of the WIF, but I think that with everything else that's going on right now, that's something we should either think about for if we have a special town meeting in the fall or talk about it for next year's annual. So where I'm at is probably lowering the 6% to 4% and no other additions. Because I don't think we know the full overall number, and I don't want to have a shortfall when we've only got $2,000 left in our general fund budget this year.
Just to clarify something relative to fiscal 20, it is likely, and I know I've been working with DOR on this, but it is likely that DOR is not going to let us calculate this in terms of using it to set the tax rate or anything like. It is likely that they will make most, if not all, communities wait for a 1-year cycle to get an understanding and an idea. We've talked to them about that and whether we could. I don't know, based on all the other conversations about where my numbers are at, whether I would ever be able to convince them of what we would be able to get.
That's their typical process.
It's very typical.
Every time we start something new, we have to wait a year.
It is exactly that.
Going to look at the reduction on the hotel tax, though?
Well, what we would be doing is if we were trying to convince them to allow us to calculate it in tax rate recap and setting and whatnot to grant us additional levy room under the levy limit, we would be looking at telling them what we thought it would go to based on where it is, based on whatever the board vote was, so that we might be able to generate that potential ability to, if we had some type of need to be able to utilize that if we were, going to be over the levy limit. But It's a long shot at best based on my conversation with our rep. He basically said, put your calculation together and we can talk to the director of accounts and see what they think. But I would not guarantee that I'd be able to convince them, given the short term, to turn this around
But it
before
won't
July 1st.
negatively impact us by lowering it.
No, all it would do is if we couldn't use it, is it would generate free cash in fiscal 21 to start that we'd be able to use, and then we could start planning for that additional number. And so, one thing, and I'm not advocating for 2.75%, but with principal reduction, I just want to let everybody know, we would be talking about potential principal reduction on $65 million worth of SRF eligible loans that we currently have on the books. And I'm not advocating, I'm just trying to let everybody know that if we get in first, we help we help shape how this money is distributed and what the allocation is going to be. Look, I had a lengthy conversation today with Andy Gottlieb from the Cape on all of this. The likely benefit, I know that Matt has asked what the benefit is or what the likely benefit of getting in first will be that we will get a larger benefit up front, and then ours would wane over time as the Cape came on board. So it's certainly, I'm not advocating for the board to consider implementing it, but there is a lot of open-end questions that still need to be addressed that should be considered if we could generate significant principal reduction.
Can you get us the WIF number of 3 if it was on everybody, or 1 or 2 or 3? If it was on
Okay,
everyone?
so the WIF number is 2.2 million with the same $100,000 exemption that we have on CPC now, and we could potentially leverage that into a borrowing
Of a similar amount.
of potentially. I'm not sure. I'd have to run those numbers
Yeah,
to
that's what I'm
calculate
asking
it,
for.
but that would also, if we had principal reduction, we'd also be reducing the tax rate since a substantial amount. Just for an example, $14 million is debt excluded. So if we participated in this, that debt exclusion amount would be reduced by whatever that principal reduction is, on top of any reductions from the SRF. So again, not advocating one way or the other, but these are some of the things that should be discussed as we move down and do this.
I just have Christine Coletti, Sandpiper Way. A couple more questions and also just kind of clarify a few things. So by April 9th, which is the town meeting?
April 1st.
Oh, April 1st. So we're going to have answers as to what the new tax will be, or the tax will be, the local tax.
We'll set the warrant on the 23rd, which it will get published on the 30th.
The week or two after.
And then that will be what we take to town meeting. If town meeting were to vote it down, it would be 6%. If we take 3 or 4 or 5 to town meeting and it passes, then that will be the rate.
Okay, so people vote on that new proposed amount. All right.
So, John, I would ask you, the Attorney General has 90 days after no? So we don't have to wait for them to...
This isn't an attorney general.
No, this would just be a local acceptance vote, an amendment. It's not a bylaw. That requires the Attorney General.
Good.
So then, after April 1st, we, as a homeowner, would be able to, if we've had some contracts already printed up, we would have the language in there that there could be an adjustment in the amount that the person has to pay. Okay. And where does the state get the information of who has a short-term rental? Are they pulling it off of Home Away, or does the rental people give that information? Where does that come from?
I don't think we know yet how they're policing it, but you do have to.
You're responsible to register.
You're required to register.
What, do you do that through Mass Tax Connect? You do it now?
It's not up yet,
It's
but
not up yet?
you will be doing it.
Okay. And then it has to be paid the month following the fully executed contract, or the month after? So if the person... But the filing, what if the person backs out, doesn't fulfill their contract? So that's a question. Okay. And then I just want to say that I think that the economic impact is important to Nantucket of the people who come here for short term. They don't live here year round. They're not just day trippers. And they shop here, they eat out, they buy food in the grocery store, they get gas, they support Nantucketers. So there is a difference between a renter, I mean, they're giving us something, and we need them, just like we need our year-round people. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
I know we've been at this for a long time, but I just wanted to remind the board that the decision on the WIF, whether you voted at town meeting in April or you wait till November, it still needs a ballot question next year. So if you want to wait until November, it would not delay the implementation of the WIF.
It sounds like we're setting ourselves up for a special town meeting again.
Andrew will be happy.
And
If I may quickly, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Andy Lowell, speaking in behalf of the Harbor Shellfish Advisory Board. Here simply to ask you not to forget why this was brought into action. And if it wasn't for our harbors and our shorelines and our waterfront, there may not be a rental tax to talk about. So if there's money to be made at the end of the season on this, we're hoping you'll focus on some infrastructure that has needed to catch up with the development that's taken place, and look into our drainage systems, our stormwater runoff. There's systems in place that we know are in degradation. We know that our harbor water quality has been in a state of decline. So if there's a positive outcome from this, hopefully it can be that we can catch up on the declining water quality and use this in the right way to clean up some of our infrastructure. Thanks.
I think that is a high priority for this board. Cindy. Oh, Julie. Then Cindy.
I'm just wondering what going along with what he had to just say now is there a guarantee with the wastewater tax that it's going to go toward the island?
The 2.75 that we've been discussing?
No.
It would be an entire board. John can elaborate a little bit.
So under the legislation, the fund can spend up to 10% of the monies collected to conduct studies and so forth, and to pay consultants. The remainder of the amount is supposed to be equitably distributed in accordance with the amount of money each town puts in. That doesn't mean a dollar for dollar will come back to Nantucket. It could mean that substantially more comes back to Nantucket if you're in early, and because, as Brian said, you have all this debt, SRF debt forgiveness that could be potentially available. But it could also mean that you get less than what you've put in. It's going to depend on the management board and how they draft the rules for the distribution of the fund.
But at the moment, the consensus of the board is to not. At the moment, the consensus of the board is to not move forward with that fund.
I just wanted to know if you could speak to the registration of the homes. Would it be the same registration for the state and the town, one place you register? And when does that happen? And will there be inspections of these homes by some local new hired home inspector, that kind of thing? We've had homeowners today cancel leases and over the last week say they don't want to rent anymore, just like Penny said. We had one cancel a lease today. I don't want to register my house and subject myself to inspections. And so I wanted to know, what's up with that? What's the timeline on that? You know, where are they registering? Is it register with the state and also with the town in one place? When does that have to happen by? And who's going to inspect it? That kind of thing. Need to know. People are asking.
So under the state law, the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development is charged with drafting regulations, and they're going to set up the registry program at the state level. Now, if it was up today and you went to that registry, you wouldn't see, 35 Main Street. You would see Main Street, but the property would not be specifically identified. Yes, right. So, well, yeah. So the town does not have to have its own registry. You can rely upon the state registry. But by bylaw, you could create a local registry. And you could have a bylaw that required home inspections. The Board of Health could do it as a health regulation. But that all remains to be seen. I think we're pretty far down the line in terms of being able to answer your specific questions. We don't know enough until those regulations come out. We see how the registry is going to work, and the town decides whether you want to do your own local bylaw registry.
Okay, so there's a lot of unanswered questions. The cart before the horse is what's happening. We don't know what to tell people in there.
Right. Based on the last hour and a half, I'd say there are.
Tenants.
The list of unanswered questions is getting longer.
And that's a big one. I mean, we've had, 4 or 5 homeowners say, I'm not going to rent anymore just this week. It's only Wednesday, so I don't know.
Cindy,
It's
I think
because they don't want to have
Cindy,
inspections and register.
I think the consensus of this board is that we're probably not taking anything to this town meeting to create any of these registries.
And
no citizens could submit anything for this year, but it does not preclude that next year that a citizen won't submit something that creates a registry of some sort.
And under the state law, there isn't a home inspection program under state law.
Is there a fee associated with registration?
I think the law allows a fee.
Okay, there's too much crosstalk that's happening not on the mic.
I know the local bylaw provision definitely allows the town to assess a fee.
Okay, we're going to take this up again for some formal votes next week. I think you've got a fairly good idea of where the board stands. We do have one member who's not present.
Thank you.
Thank you for all for coming. We do have a couple more items on our agenda.
Okay, we're not done with the warrant yet. So the next item that is outstanding that was suggested by town administration, but I don't know that I have a final from the board, is whether or not to rescind the bylaw establishing the Historical Commission, not the HTC, the Historical Commission, which has been inactive for several years.
I'm fine with that.
Me too.
Yeah.
Next.
Why have they been inactive? What's the?
Can't get members. They don't have charge. It's not real clear.
They never meet.
And remember, if you remember the history, I mean, it was.
No, I understand.
Okay.
Well.
The board discussed a zoning bylaw concerning marijuana craft growers and some zoning locations, but I think that we heard last week or last meeting maybe that there was not sufficient time with education and public outreach and that sort of thing to get something together, but I had it on here to be certain of that.
Yeah, I think we're getting, from what I've heard, and Andrew might, I don't know if he has anything to comment now, but it seems like we're getting closer. But it is fairly complex, and we do have some guidelines from a couple other towns who are starting to do something similar, but it feels like we're not going to be able to get it together for this town meeting and taking the time to try and get it right. We'll be better off at a subsequent meeting.
Okay. There are 3 articles that came in late and one of them might be in your packet. Two of them are zoning articles. One is technical amendments for the zoning bylaw, and I think they seem to be very minor in nature. But maybe one of you guys could just briefly explain it. And there was another zoning bylaw about open space. What is it again? An open space district that was put forward by the planning board. Is that a definite that they want it in?
The planning board had a discussion about this. Is one of the new members had proposed this district, and the board had voted to support it. She, at some point, had decided to advance it maybe as a citizen article, and then decided not to. So there was a little back and forth on that. But as it stands right now, the planning board did vote to support that article.
So you have not seen that yet. I'm bringing it to your attention now. At least I don't think you have. So that will get sent around to you for next week's discussion, and maybe somebody can talk about it next week. Okay, and the third one is just a article that came forward from the finance department, which relates to the senior work-off program and making it a little clearer about how it's administered. I guess I would say that, and we'll get you that as well. So I also just wanted to point out to you that there are a number of outstanding items that are in progress, just so that you know. As of the time that I prepared this outline, I was checking on the current home rule petition status with our legislators, and I have that now. There were a couple of bills that were approved at the end of the year, and so they don't need to be in the warrant anymore. There's a pretty significant, potentially significant technical bylaw amendment, sort of like the zoning technical changes, but this is throughout the town code that relates from our regulations codification project. If you recall, we've been working on that for a while. The idea is to codify all the regulations, but in the process of doing that, General Code, which is the group that's doing it for us, has identified a number of discrepancies between the existing bylaws and the regulations, depending on what they are. And they're not overly substantial in nature. They're just things like the bylaw references a particular federal code which is no longer in existence, things like that. But this does have to be prepared, and I need to talk with John a bit about how to go about that. We also talked about, John and I, about bylaw changes regarding the select board wording. And previously, following last year's board vote and also the home rule petition that was passed at town meeting, we said that we probably needed to wait to make all of the changes in the town code until that home rule petition was passed, right? But then now I think are we going to go ahead with a bylaw? No. Oh, we're not. Okay.
We have to, we drafted some changes to the home rule petition to put it in proper form for the legislature. So I think that will have to be on the town meeting warrant as authorization to refile that.
Yeah.
And then when that passes, then it would be appropriate to amend the bylaws.
Okay. I thought we had a more recent discussion changing that a little bit, but all the better that we don't have to add that now. But just to point out to the board that the home rule petition John just explained it, so never mind.
How much time has that taken your office? Is this, has this been a big distraction, or how much time will it take once it's implemented?
Well,
and are the proponents helping as they promised?
I don't know that I don't think we've spent an awful lot of time changing documents at this point, other than documents in a going forward manner. But
you have.
But it's in the retainer, so that's the question.
Right. Right. If it's taking time away from other, and it's true, and we're doing it, but I just think, I just like to follow up and understand if the things that were said were going to be done are done, and is it working, and is it as easy as it was supposed to be?
So if the home rule petition passes, then there will be a fair amount of work to amend the bylaws.
Okay.
And the changing of the bylaws, so just to run that through a bit, eventually there would be an article at town meeting that probably says something like, all references to the Board of Selectmen are changed to Select Board, or
Yeah,
whatever.
something
And-
like that.
Something like that. And, but we're not going to have a, 800-page document that actually does that.
No,
right?
we're not, based
Yeah, okay.
upon the tone of your question.
But it will be a significant project for general code.
Yes.
I mean, maybe not, maybe it's not as significant as we think. Maybe it's a find and replace
Maybe.
kind of a thing. It might be a little more complicated than that, but that's how I think it would go, something along those lines. We have a couple of special appropriation articles that Brian and I are working on. One is to finalize the rideshare article, which we think we're going to put into an existing article. We need to determine if we actually need a parking commission revolving fund now, since we don't even have a parking commission yet, and we don't know what we would put into it. And we're working on finalizing the Affordable Housing Trust article that you all have already voted. The ordering of the articles is not entirely final, and while Andrew and Leslie are here, I just need you guys to take a look at the zoning, make sure those are in an okay order. And the last couple of things that are on my list are, you can just strike those are taken care of. So next week, hopefully you will have, you may or may not have a revised draft warrant, but you will have a revised outline.
So when do we adopt the warrant?
The 23rd.
Okay, so we'll have a draft or a highlighted warrant by the time we adopt it.
Yeah, and hopefully there won't be very much highlighting.
Okay. And I looked through it. There really wasn't. There was a fair amount in the beginning, and then there wasn't for a long time. So.
Yeah, it's mostly reminders for me.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So three ambulances.
Yeah, ignore
Okay.
that.
All right. Okay. I didn't know if we were supposed to know that.
Yeah.
Earlier, we had asked for a placeholder for, there's been an ongoing home rule petition that deals with the housing covenant, the passage of that to family members. And I know that piece of legislation has been having trouble. And so one of the suggestions was maybe, is there another way besides legislation to deal with that problem, which would be to change the zoning provision and require something else to allow the passage? That's one of our board members has been interested in that. So the good news is it would take one of the home rule petitions out of the warrant, but it would substitute the other article,
Okay.
the other provisions, and that's something we have to review with town council.
All right, so I need it ASAP. I had a suggestion. If I'm done with the warrant, unless any of you have any questions or comments or additions. My suggestion was that if it wouldn't be too much trouble to put the 2020 Enterprise Fund budget reviews off to next week.
That sounds like a great idea, unless anyone was really anxious to talk about them tonight.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Rob and David and Brian.
Okay. So that takes us to the final review approval of the memorandum of agreement, regulatory agreement and declaration of restrictive covenants and local initiative program, applications for local action units and Department of Housing and Community Development with Richmond Great Point Development regarding workforce rental and home ownership development projects and municipal road improvements. I believe you all have a final draft, and Tucker is here, as well as Dave Arminetti.
So my only question: were there any changes to the final that weren't part of our discussion in executive session? I assume no.
I don't believe there's anything material
Okay.
that occurred after that discussion. Any changes?
There was quite a thorough back and forth.
Yes. So Tucker Holland, housing specialist. I can briefly touch on the points of where we ended up, whatever would be helpful.
Are you satisfied with the final agreement?
Yes. I want to, Vicki Marsh, Attorney Marsh is not here tonight, but I want to make special note of the work that she put in on this. She did an excellent job, in my opinion. But yes, we both are satisfied where things have ended up. It's going to allow the project to move forward more expeditiously. It's going to allow us to have units on the SHI list at an earlier point, get into safe harbor, and perhaps most importantly, get the housing built as expeditiously as possible. So we like where we ended up. In addition, I should point out, with the board's direction, we ended up as a town with 2 additional 80% AMI restricted units and 2 additional 175% AMI restricted units, which is significant.
All ownership units.
All ownership, yes.
And the apartment rentals will give us, that qualify for the SHI, and the aggregate of them will give us 2 years of safe harbor.
Correct.
Once approved.
Correct.
So that's the importance of it being moving along more quickly. Sorry, Jim.
I will say, just having observed the first MOA and this one with the Richmond, this has been a very thoughtful consideration, professional back and forth between the parties. We're fortunate to have staff that and legal resources to apply. And it's taken a lot of consideration within the executive session. So I would make a motion that we approve the memorandum of agreement as submitted tonight.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And thank Vicky. And thank you, Dave, for your work on it. Okay, committee reports. Hold them all till next week.
I just have one.
It was the holidays.
I have one. Matt and I participated yesterday, I guess, in the workshop for community resilience planning. It was a very robust workshop over a whole day and had stakeholders representing just really all aspects of our community, professionally orchestrated with our consultants, including folks from the Nature Conservancy and others. And we came up with a dozen or so kind of immediate things to be thinking about. There were some surprises as part of that conversation. We kind of, not that the votes were that important, but transportation was, needs were, and the impact on storms and flooding on that was received the second highest votes, if you will, and a really a thoughtful consideration about the impact or discussion about relocating ferry terminals, especially the High Line, given the location of the High Line. So that was kind of one of the surprises that came out